Yo podría hacer esta ponencia en español, pero la traducción sea más fácil entender. Por esa razón voy a seguir en inglés. I am going to speak about sustainable fisheries. Now, before I do that, or in order to do that, I will introduce our species, Homo sapiens, first, because this is the species that is supposed to manage fisheries. I presume this is... Which one is it? This one? Oh, this one. Okay. So, here we go. Now, let's go back about 300,000 years ago in Africa, perhaps in East Africa. The story actually begins much earlier, 6 million years ago, when we separated from the ancestors of the chimpanzees. Then we learned to walk on two feet, and then the hands were free. So we could manipulate things. But I think the biggest invention were language, which enabled us to form larger groups. Because you maintain friendships among apes and monkeys by back scratching, right? You scratch each other and you make friends, but you can make more friends. I have made a few friends just by speaking to them. And another thing that we invented is our imagination. We can imagine things long before they happen, and even imagine things that don't exist. But it helps, because it helps also form groups. And these groups became strong enough to enable us to stop being prey and to become predators. Now, somebody this morning said we are part of the ecosystem. Actually, I will say that our effort, since we exist, is to get us out of it and to become independent of it. And our efforts obviously do not work, but we have always tried to become independent of it. But first, the evidence of symbolic thinking. 160,000 years ago, in a big cave in West Africa, they found abalone shells. And these abalone shells, well, people ate the abalone, but they put in it pigment, ochre. I don't know, you know what ochre is in Spanish? This red. You can mark yourself, and you can say, I belong to this group and not to this group. This is important. And in fact, in Africa, people make scarification for the purpose of identification. It's like being Catholic or Protestant. Then complex weapons are also evidence of symbolic thinking 800, 900,000 years ago. Now, something big happened about 70,000 years ago. The first modern human left Africa. Various hominin had left Africa before, 2 million years ago. The Homo robustus went all the way to Asia and became the ancestors of various Peking man and Homo florensis in the Philippines and so on. But they were not us. Us, we moved, and all of you have ancestors who descended from about 1,000 people who left Africa through Yemen, probably, because at the time you could walk across the Red Sea. That long before the Bible story about crossing the Red Sea. And then people the earth. We are a very successful invasive species. We are the most successful invasive species, as you will see. And the first thing that we did when we moved into a new place is kill all the large animals. The largest animals are herbivores, so they were all killed, and the carnivores that relied on them went by the wayside, fell prey or were killed also, except in Africa, because in Africa the animals knew that an ape on two legs with a stick is dangerous. But in Europe, about 9 genera went, and this is genera. So a genus can contain lots of species. For example, there is 33 species of genera in America that went extinct about 20,000 years ago. But one genus of mammoth, big elephants, there were 3 or 4 species. So it's more than 100, 150 species altogether. The horses were eliminated from North Africa, for example, and they had to be reintroduced. They were reintroduced by the Spaniard. We saw that yesterday in the park yesterday. The Spaniard reintroduced horses in America. And in South America, lots of weird animals. And in Australia, lots of extremely weird animals. And on islands, particularly birds. The giant bird in the rock in Madagascar, we know about the eggs that were big like this, and 11 species of moa on what is now New Zealand. They were killed in the year 1000 about, and in a period of 100 years, when the Maori came from Tahiti. So, then we invented agriculture. Now, agriculture didn't come from one place. There were lots of centers. For example, corn. Here, all kind of, zucchini or some other plants like squash. Potato in here, millet in West Africa, wheat and barley in the Fertile Crescent, and rice, obviously, in China. And each of these things changed the landscape. Obviously, the animals began to be, the surviving animals that were not hunted to death began to lose habitat. And for example, there is an excellent story of the history of China. It's called the retreat of the elephant, because the elephant went all the way to Beijing before. But the Han culture, the main Chinese culture, cannot tolerate elephants. And so the Han culture, the Chinese culture, developed as a retreat of the elephant. In Thailand, in India, they can tolerate elephants, but not in China. Anyway, so that is the invention of agriculture, which led to massive, desertification. There is an excellent book that if you don't know it, that I highly recommend, that claims that every antique civilization lasted about 200-300 years. And then it had wiped out the agricultural base or the forage base of the horses, of the other animals. And there are exceptions to these rules. One of them is Egypt, because they had the soil being renewed every year by the Nile, the flood of the Nile, until was not caused by the abolition of slavery in the slave states. It was caused by the refusal of the expansion of the slave state into the West. And they wanted to extend. Why did they want to do that? Because the soil in Virginia and in the other slave state was going down, because farming, cultivating tobacco and cotton is very bad for the soil, and the soil was not being repaired. So they wanted to expand, and the North was against it, sparked civil war. And this went on until in Oklahoma, in the 1920s, a desertification of the entire state took place, and they had lots of people from Oklahoma migrated to California and so on. There is good literature about that. So desertification is going on, and you cannot see news from Iraq, for example. If you see news from Iraq, there's always sand in the background and some desert. But Iraq is where Babylon was, where there was a wheat-based culture that was extremely productive, and it was verdant land, and it's gone. So large animal, the plants, and even the soil. Yep. So before the great European expansion that began, let's say, in 1492, and they came here, there was another big expansion that took place in the Pacific and in the Indian Ocean. That is the Austronesian expansion. The Austronesian are people who originated from Taiwan, and in fact, some of them still live in the highland of Taiwan. They are not Han Chinese, they are not main group Chinese. And they spoke a language that is its own language family, and the Austronesian people, the Pacific, and the Philippines, Southeast Asia, all the way to Madagascar. This is the last big expansion of people before the European expansion. And the characteristic of Austronesian expansion, it took place mostly on this giant boat. They are called balangai or barangay, and there was entire villages on it. The chicken, the rat, the dogs, the children, and everything went from island to island. Incidentally, in the Philippines, I've lived a long time there, a village is called a barangay, like a boat. And the mayor is called a barangay captain. So you see the ancestry of this business. And the Polynesian and other Austronesian like to have feathers in their cap and in their soup. The meat in their soup and the cap. Anyway, they killed all the birds. So in Tahiti, that's about here. Say in Hawaii, that is here. It's here. They killed about 50% of the birds on arrival. Here they killed a big giant bird called rock. Here they killed, I mentioned it, the moa. And here they did something astonishing. They brought chicken. The chicken in Chile have genes from Polynesia. This is the only proof of the presence of Polynesian in South America. They went to Rapa Nui, but there is no direct evidence of their presence in America except for the chicken. So that's another expansion. Now, what happened in Europe during that time? Well, during that time, the Catholic Church established itself. It did not establish itself only here. It also established itself in Europe because people believe in other things before. And part of the belief is that it's good for you not to eat meat. And so there is two ways to deal with this. You can eat fish. So one trick is to declare every animal that comes on the water a fish. The beavers, the seals, the whales were all declared fish, so they can be eaten. And another way is to fish and to go fishing. And since fish can rot, it was important to have salt to preserve the fish. And a few cities like Hamburg and Bremen and Bergen in Norway became very powerful because they controlled the salt. And there is some disgusting dish that you can find in Norway and Sweden that were made without salt, rotten fish. So then trawling was invented behind a trawling vessel. The fishers always hated that, but they were not capable of preventing it. They from 1300, they English texts that say, this is trawling is bad, it destroys the flowers of the sea. The animal, complaining, small fishers complaining about trawling. Yeah. What else did they invent? Well, they invented cod fishing. Cod fishing was Norway, the big thing around Europe, but they discovered the Basque were hunting whales across the Atlantic because they had killed all the whales on the eastern side. They went for whales in the West Atlantic and discovered cod. So they moved from whaling to cod fishing. They went to cod fishing, and French, well, the Basque were in part French, in part Spanish. The French followed and the English followed, and this is the beginning of Canada, if you like, because the two powers, France and England, fought about fishing rights. So the stock of cod is documented since 1508. It was, the fishery is documented since 1508, and it produced about 100,000 tons to 200,000 tons, depending. Every summer, they caught enough fish to supply the European market. So here we are, and then there's Magellan, who was planning to go around the world. He didn't make it, and in the Philippines, the king Lapu-Lapu, who killed Magellan, is a hero. In Europe, I learned that Magellan was the hero, but not in the Philippines. He started troublemaking in the Philippines, and he got taught a lesson. Anyway, big jump. We're getting to fisheries. We're getting there. Big jump, invention, the Industrial Revolution. What is the Industrial Revolution? It's actually the use of fossil energy. Up to now, all the characters I'm talking about, all the killings, everything went based on one summer of sunlight energy in vegetable, in wheat, in dried fish, and so on. Now, when you access fossil energy, you access millions of years. And you can punch with a power of millions of years of energy, not one summer, right? So these boats, it spread very rapidly, obviously, because, we learned quickly. And now this evolution that started in the Midland in England has gone around the world, and China is a big steel producer. It's a measure of the success, so to say, of the Industrial Revolution. So Now, what you can do with steels is replace the boat that you're working with. The wood, you can replace it by steel. And obviously, the first steel boat were warships, right? With a steamboat and steel walls, you can do much damage. But it was not, almost at the same time, these things were used for trawling. And now, the first trawlers were deployed in the 1880s, around the UK. And within 10 to 20 years, they had devastated the coastal stocks that were accumulated like old growth forest. All kind of old fish, all kind of particular, every little bay, every little gulf had a stocks of its own, herring and so on. They call it, the British call them stocklet, a little population that supported a local fishery. They were all wiped out, and these things had to go operate offshore. And as you know, they ended up in 1950 fishing in Iceland. And the Icelanders had to fight the Cod War to get them out because they wanted to exploit the fishery themselves. Now, this, you will know what it is, World War I. In other words, the trawlers increased the catch tremendously. Then the war was declared, or it took place. The young men and the trawlers were on to the front, no fishing. There were mines all across the North Sea, all across the Eastern Atlantic, so you couldn't go fishing. And World War II, same thing. The Germans did this with a submarine. And fishing continues and renewed. And now, in an English coast, you get about 5% of what you got 100 years ago, or when it began, 5%. And it's completely different animals. But in biomass, it's 5%. So reduction by a factor of 20. So, 20, yes. So this, I mentioned the steam trawlers. They became, obviously, they were warships that were converted to fishing. And in fact, the war of Western European nation against Germany and the submarine, because Germany was easy to isolate from international trade. So Germany in World War I and World War II used submarines, big submarines, and this was their major weapon, and it was very successful at the beginning. So the Western powers, England and France and later the US, developed anti-submarine warfare. And this anti-submarine warfare is what we use in fisheries. So steam trawlers, diesel engines later, and radar, acoustic fish finders, spotter planes. Now, a spotter plane, what is it? It's a plane that is on a ship and goes see where the school of fish are. I went one time with a colleague, Cisneros, over the Gulf of California. We can see the schools of tuna. That was how the ship Bismarck, the big battleship, the German, was sunk. They had the British had a carrier with a biplane on it that spotted where the Bismarck was, and then they could unlash their own power on it. So basically, all of this, including GPS and satellite navigation and stuff, are weapons of war that are used against fish. And remember, they have brains about like this, much bigger than that of Germans, much smaller. So they don't have much chance. So So we won the war against fish. We do. So that's the evolution of fishing fleet in the last decades. And you cannot add boats because small boats and big boats cannot be added. You cannot add also the length of the boat. That doesn't make sense, right? But you can add the power of the engine, because it scales with fishing power. So two boats of 100 each is about equivalent to one of 200 horsepower. So you can add horsepower, and then you add a 2% factor for year for the increase of technology, and you get effective fishing power. And you can see that the big change is the development in Asia. And China, for example, has begun fishing outside of its border, outside of its own water in '85. They didn't before. But China is the main driver of that. Japan also, Taiwan, and a few other countries. Europe is actually also serious, and the other ones is nothing compared with that. This is not really declining. The last years there has been no major change. It's increasing further. Student, I was fishing on a German vessel in Canada, and we were fishing 1 kilometer deep, and we brought back cod, 2-3 tons per haul, other fish, and rocks as big as a Volkswagen. Boom! They were dumped on board and then thrown away because we were a research vessel. So that's where we fish, but to a depth of about 1.5 kilometer. This is 1.5 kilometer. This is where Korean and Spanish fish very deep. Yeah. We also discovered that the method we used to plot this was biased downward. In other words, they fish even deeper, but the graph I still have it. Anyway, so now all this fishing generates catch. Catch is a complicated term because what is known as catch, for example, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations has a catch database that is not catch, it's only landings. The fish that is landed. The catch is all the fish that are killed by operation. In other words, descartes, are also caught, even though they are not landed. Also, if you have ghost gear, fishing gear that are left in the water, they continue fishing and killing fish. This is also part of the catch. So, and then we don't count fish, we count tons, which is an odd thing. And I've just given a lecture to a group of people who want to know how many fish are caught. It always ends up with fishing trillions. We cannot comprehend trillions. Yeah. So basically, you find that the catch that the World Database on Catch, that FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, publishes, is not the catch, is what is reported to FAO by the countries. There are some countries that don't report, North Korea and Brazil. North Korea and Brazil don't report annual catch. I know why North Korea doesn't do it, but Brazil. Anyway, so we treat the catch that is reported as like the frame. Then we fill in what is missing. What is missing is the catch by small-scale fishers, usually don't bother. For example, the UK, the Great Britain, they don't report to FAO anything that is caught by a vessel of less than 10 meters. Why? Because to the fish, it doesn't matter whether they're caught by 9 meters or 11 meters, but they don't report it. And lots of countries are like that. In the US, for example, the catch of states that is done within 3 miles is not reported. So they report only the catch that NOAA analyzes, that is from 3 miles to 200 miles around the coast. And the recreational catch is never reported, and the catch of subsistence fishes is never reported. And it's mainly done by women. In lots of countries, women fish. This is a story that women only market the fish. No, they don't. They also catch fish, about 2 million tons, and so on. And then we have done a giant project of reconstruction of the catch in each country of the world, with the collaboration of about 400 people who participated in the world, including in Honduras. And this was published in an atlas. And it is online, updated to 2019, and it will very soon be updated to 2020 in another project that I have just started. And this reconstruction, that is the result. And in terms of number, so that is the reported catch, FAO, and they say, well, it's stable. Actually, it's not, but it's declining. The world catch is declining. And the maximum was reached in 96. 96 in both the reported and the reconstructed catch. And that is the error bound because we estimate the uncertainty around the reconstruction. And it is now, the world catch reconstructed is about going to be here, and the world catch as reported is about here. So the catch statistics and what people say about the world catch is wrong, because essentially FAO reports only industrial fishing, and they don't report small-scale fishing. And when people talk about fisheries, they talk about millions and millions of people who work in fisheries, but their catch is not reported. It's the catch of a few 100,000 who work industrial fishing. So we have a big social problem there, a problem of understanding the issues. And when big economists, fisheries economists, work for the World Bank assessing the fisheries, it's always wrong what they end up saying, because they don't consider small-scale fisheries. Because small-scale fisheries, they think it's small, but it's not. It's not. It's simply that it is not included in the statistics. So you can imagine that I don't have any friends with this. There are lots of people who criticize that. Anyway, so there are optimists in the world, and they notice that the world catch is going down, but then they say, if we follow your advice, we would do this. If you manage the stock right, they would recover. And depending on what you use, they would recover. If you continue, it would go down the tube, or maybe it would not go down that much if we consider a few conservation measures. These people are essentially the church of or fisheries. I'm a dissident then. It would be nice if it were possible. But actually, 2 weeks ago, an interesting paper was published in Science that said that, by a bunch of Australian mainly, that stock assessment model, in other words, what we use to manage the fisheries, when we manage them, because many are not managed, most of them are not managed, but FAO uses about 400 managed fisheries in the world to state how the world fisheries are done. I don't need to stress that FAO is not going to talk about developing countries. It talks only about industrialized countries, rich countries, and they use models that are very complicated. And I don't know how much modeling or mathematics you know, but the model have up to 40 parameters. Now, you cannot parameterize anything that has 40 parameters. You perhaps can get 10 or 15 from data, and the rest you have to fiddle them. And we were asked to write a comment on this, and we wanted to submit this picture because we had actually discovered the same thing, but they had written a good paper whereas we mentioned that casually in passing in another paper in a Polish journal. A Polish journal would not compete against Science, so we could only comment. Anyway, this is a two-parameter model. This is the sophisticated things, and this is the empirical data. You can say, why is it slanted? Because you can. And basically, the model, the model that is used for stock assessment are like this. And the simple model that are ecologically based, that take account of the ecology of fish, look like this. And these are data that are model-free. And this is the catch that you can get, and this is the biomass. And you can see that if you try to maximize the catch, you will be outside of the reasonable zone. And what will you do then? You will actually construct so-called phantom recoveries. So you cannot know how much fish there is in the water, but you can compare prediction of what is in the water. You can compare them. And if you compare an early prediction, for example, that one, in this period, it was there. And then there was an advice given that it will recover to that level. And therefore, the quota that was proposed was too high, was very high. However, the next advice was showed that it was not reaching that level. The red line. It was not here, but here. So what you do? Well, you do, because you apply the same model, you propose an advice, you apply your model again, and it predicts another recovery. And this is the advice that you give in 21. And then in 2021, the stock is here. It's not at this level anymore because the quota was too high. So the advice now is there, but the quota will again be too high and will go down. This explains why stocks do not recover. So the stock in Canada that I mentioned began the fishery in 1508. It was producing 200,000 tons until 1950. And then in 1950, they allowed trawlers from Europe to come. They came from the Soviet Union, from Poland, from France, from Spain, even from Cuba. Everybody was fishing there, cod. And the quota were too high, and the cod collapsed. They reached a catch of 800,000 tons a year instead of 20,000. What happened is the stock collapsed. So the Canadian government declared an exclusive fishing zone. It was not exclusive economic zone because it was in 79, and that the exclusive economic zone became legal in 1982. So Canada declared an exclusive fishing zone, kicked all the foreigners out, and built its own fleet of trawlers. The fishery then collapsed in 92, and the stock was reduced from 2 million tons to about 20,000 tons. And you know what they did? They keep giving it too high quota. And so it never recovers. It never recovers. It's still 10,000, 20,000 tons. That was Canada. Canada has had the most prestigious fishery research organization. Like they were dominating fisheries research, the same way that they dominated hockey. You know, hockey. You're not supposed to say ice hockey in Canada. You say just hockey. Yeah. So.
I change.
You'll change. Well, it is
Please.
died, indeed.
Yeah.
Sorry. I didn't know. So, now, stock assessment, I know it's boring, but then you asked for it. You wanted to know sustainability of fisheries. Stock assessment is difficult. Even if you have a 2-parameter model, you have to know some math. So another technique was found out by FAO. They produced a thing where they use the trajectory of the catch. If it is increasing, the stock is undeveloped. If it is developing, it's increasing faster, it's developing, and when it's on top, before declining again, it is stagnating, fully developed. And then it collapses. They call it senescent. It's not senescent, it's overfished, but you have to be careful when you work for FAO. And anyway, so they produce that, and they still do. They still use this technique to show how fisheries are doing in a certain area or in a certain part of the world. This was for the world, but actually it was for 400 stocks of the developing world, of the developed world, sorry, but we have, we made it a little bit more simple. You take, we decided if you catch, you can do it only retroactively. So you have a maximum catch, you call it 100%. And until you have 10% at the beginning, you call it underdeveloped. From 10% to 50%, you call it developing. Fully exploited is 50% to 100%. And then overexploited, it declines, and then crashed at 10%. If you catch 10% of what we caught before, the stock is crashed. Why not? And that is even more simple. And we applied this to the world, and we got stock status plot. It tells us essentially that the trends in the world, and that includes all countries, is really the few stocks are rebuilding. Remember, rebuilding. But most of them are moved from developing to exploited to overexploited and some to collapse. Okay, that is the world. Now, so we transform FAO invention we took it over, simplified it, but if you put this on top of that, it actually shows the same. They still use it. But what they do is they don't show the early years. You see that it started in 1950 here, right? And it showed the decline in 50. Here they cut it. So you don't see what happened before. This is shifting baseline. You don't see what happened before, and you pretend it didn't happen, but actually it did. So this cutting is actually cheating. So now we look at Mexico. I'm sure you have waited passionately. What do I have to say about Mexico? Yeah. So Mexico was done by Andrés Cisneros Montemayor. This is now a young professor. He was the PhD student of one of my colleagues, and it is a good friend. He with his father. That's the one I went flying over the Gulf of Mexico, and so we published this reconstruction in marine policy, and it went to 210, and then we updated it. Some people. It concerned the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific coast. And here we are, the catch reconstruction. It's shown by species. We can show it by gear, we can show it by use of whether it's for human consumption or for fish meal. We allow whether it's landed or discarded and so on. We can show it also in ton or in dollars. That is for all countries of the world. And the catch of Mexico is declining. Something is happening there. I will soon find out what it is when we do the extension to 2022, because that stops in 2019. And I think I know what this is. But the same thing happened in Mexico. This is not sustainable. It's increasing. You cannot have an increase. The only thing that is called sustainable is the thing that don't change, right? If you change that way or that way, it indicates. So it looks better than the average. It doesn't look, for most countries, it looks really bad. For Mexico, it looks okay. Except if you look at the stock data plot, it looks like the unfished stocks in the Atlantic coast don't do well, except that some have recovered, and most stocks are near the maximum, and a few have collapsed. And in the Pacific coast, it goes up and down far more, because first of all, the catch is much bigger. Or you don't see it here, but the catch is much bigger in the Pacific coast. And there is lots of sardines that go up and down a lot. So, Mexico, not the worst, but yeah. But that is more tricky. In '95, I wrote a paper called Fishing Down Marine Food Web. That is the demonstration that we tend to be fishing lower and lower down in the food web. At high trophic level first, and then lower trophic level. The big fish are gone. And this is the trophic level. And later, we improve on this method because we began to separate coastal from non-coastal fish. And it turns out in coastal area, the the decline is rather constant here. And the decline, there is no decline offshore, because offshore you can only catch big fish, right? Unless you catch myctophids, but who wants to catch myctophid and get poisoned? Yeah, no, the Norwegians are going to serve us very, very soon myctophid fed tuna, salmon. Their salmon are going to be fed with myctophid. You wait. Anyway, on the Pacific coast, it's unclear. The fishery is not expanding spatially. Here, the fishery on the Atlantic coast has expanded from inshore to offshore. The fishery since the 60s is not moving much, and the trophic level is not changing much in the Pacific. So sustainability, perhaps? I don't know. Now come the pièce de résistance, the heavy statement about non-sustainability. Say, again, the fisheries, they fish at trophic level 3.5, usually to 4.5. That's a big fish. And then the sardine type is 2.5 to 3. Most fish, like little ones, they eat zooplankton, which is here, right? The herbivorous zooplankton eats phytoplankton, which has a trophic level of 1 by definition. So the fisheries tuna fisheries are there. Fisheries for sardine are here. Zooplankton fisheries don't really exist. So fisheries move between here. Then it turns out that the transfer efficiency, the biomass that is consumed, declines by 90% by trophic level. So you have 10% transfer efficiency between the trophic level. That's not a guess. It is an average from lots of ecosystem modeling. So about 10%. So if you catch 1 ton of tuna, it means this tuna have eaten 10 tons of sardines, which have eaten 100 tons of zooplankton, which have eaten 1,000 tons of phytoplankton, if you express everything in a wet weight. So we can, using fish base, know the trophic level of all fish. We have maps by NOAA that tell us the primary production of all the ocean. So we can map the catch that we have spread, that we have mapped. You can turn it into trophic level, quantity. We have the trophic level of each fish. We know how much primary production is required. And then we know the primary production, what is here. The ratio between the two is the fraction of primary production that is used, right? We published that in Nature the first time in 95. So here we go, and that is the primary production required in the world in the 50s. You can see that where it's yellow and like reddish, this is about 20%, let's say, where it's red, and basically in the North Atlantic and East Asia. That is a mistake, and obviously there were fisheries here, but they 1 or 2 pixels, you don't see it. Now, hold to your seat and see what happens. Ta-da! Ta-da! So that's where we are now. Sustainability? Nope. No, we're not sustainable. So I've shown you human escaping from Africa, zapping all the animals, the big one. Then even horses in North America, they would have been useful when the Spaniard came. Can you imagine if the Mayas had had horses? They would have, anyway. So I have shown you how the Austronesians spread and introduced rats and zapped the birds and stuff. And now we mastered the ocean. That's what we do. So we can soon get to a summary. The summary is that we tend to fish down. That's a paper wrote in 1998, a group of people. We kind of, as soon as we are capable of getting big fish, we get the big fish. And then there are fewer big fish, and we go after those, and then after those, and the Norwegian would go after those even if they could, because they feed the salmon that they think are feeding the world. Actually, they are eating fish, the Norwegian and the salmon. They are not producing fish, right? That's everywhere, and I will show you here what happens at the tip of this arrow. You see here, when you're here, you have medusa outbreak, jellyfish outbreaks, you harmful algal bloom outbreak and stuff. But that's what happened at the end of the fishing down arrow. This is the fish that 50% of the catch of China in their own waters is this. Stuff that they don't eat. They do aquaculture with it. The bulldozers, the fish are not handled like fish. They are handled like sand, like dirt. Look at this. And these are tiny fish, the babies of other fish, jellyfish, plankton, all kind of crap. And that is at the end of the arrow. That's what we do if we don't watch it. And that's the reason why China is fishing everywhere, because they cannot eat that. So, in conclusion, fisheries have never been sustainable. They have never been sustainable in the sense that we decided to maintain them. They have been maintained for centuries by the fact that we couldn't fish deep, by the fact that we couldn't give fish in winter when it's cold and icy and stuff. They have been maintained because the fish were too far or too fierce. Like the reason why shark fin soup is very prestigious is because it was very difficult before to catch a shark. So it was a thing when you could serve shark fin soup. Now it means nothing because we can catch any fish anywhere, anytime we want. And we do. That's the problem. Then we do. And even in fisheries that we think are well managed, we have a bias that tends to make the quota too high. That I just showed you from the equipment. So sustainability cannot be our goal. In fact, now our goal should be rebuilding. And rebuilding means creating marine protected area, declaring some place holy. You don't fish there. And that rebuilds fish. Now, I could give a lecture about the danger of plastic pollution in myctophid fish, because that's the next fishery, the next big fishery. There are about supposedly 10 billion tons of myctophids that are waiting to be fished. Well, if the Norwegians do that, which they plan to do, that will be the end of food webs on the open ocean. So I could talk about aquaculture in this context. It is not a solution because the aquaculture that we have in the West is called B, for bad. There is also another form of aquaculture that is A, that is Asian type. In Asia, even in China, lots of herbivores are found. Oysters, mussels, clams, and so on. That you don't need to feed them, and it is in addition to your diet, in addition to seafood. And essentially, you could feed the world with aquaculture A. But when in the West, when we talk about aquaculture, we mean aquaculture B, which is farming salmon or sea bass or something, or tuna even. And for tuna, we need 10 tons of sardine to produce 1 ton of tuna. That is like a drug, and that's the reason why it's completely in the hands of the mafia, the European, because you're not the only one who is infested with gangsters. They also exist in Europe. Yeah, okay. So we know, in principle, we know how to do this. We could also get rid of global warming. We know how to do this. But the problem is political. And I would like to finish with a remark. This morning I wanted to say something, but I didn't. When you talked about fighting chemical pollution and plastic pollution, you didn't talk enough about fighting the companies, the Coca-Cola, to confront them with what they do and to demonstrate against them. You talk about in getting children who are 6 years old to paint sharks on the wall, and that is supposed to raise their consciousness. Well, these kids, even if they have understood what you want and still believe in it in 20 years, that is, by that time, we will be choking in the bottles that Coca-Cola wants to produce. We have to fight these people right away and identify them and talk about them. Not so much about cleaning beaches, I'm sorry, but it's good to clean beaches. It helps with your head, but it doesn't help with the problem, because the problem is that Coca-Cola and the other gangsters plan to produce more of this poison that they do. And without attacking them directly, we'll never get anywhere. In other words, what I want to say is that we have the science to solve our problem, and we don't attack the politicians that work with the companies against us and against people. That's what I do. So that's my last sentence. It's open to discussion whether we will do it or we can do it. I'm kind of pessimistic, but I would like to hear that I'm wrong. Thank you very much.
Si
You
me
can ask
permiten más de una.
You can ask in Spanish.
En español, ok. Tendría un par de preguntas aprovechando. La primera pregunta es relativamente reciente este fenómeno de la niña en el Atlántico, y se espera que en lugar de que se calienten las aguas como estaba sucediendo, aparentemente la niña las podría enfriar. ¿Qué efecto tendría esto sobre la biodiversidad global?
Okay.
Y específicamente, posiblemente, sobre las pesquerías?
Okay, I will answer first this one and then the next. So, I've not talked about physical oceanography. I have not. But actually, what I'm interested now is how fish react to increased temperature. And increased temperature is deadly for fish because there are two processes that are happening. If you increase the temperature, there is less oxygen in the water. Everybody knows that. But lots of people ignore the fact that when you increase temperature, fish need more oxygen. And this effect that fish need more oxygen is much stronger than the decline due to temperature. That means the fish are squeezed between two forces, less oxygen in the water, and they need more oxygen. And there is another thing that is more tricky. The gill area, the branchias, they don't grow as fast as the volume of the fish. They don't grow as fast. So the bigger a fish is, the less surface area per volume, the gill surface area per volume it has. So the big fish have a problem breathing. So the problem is resolved by staying smaller. So if you increase the temperature, the fish if it's slow, will not grow and remain smaller. We can see that also. Or they will die. Why? Because a heat wave, a sudden increase in temperature, is not like a heat wave on air. A heat wave, you had several, I'm sure, the last years, is very disagreeable. A few old people like me die, and maybe a few children that are forgotten in cars. But except for these, people don't die on the street. But a forest fire kills all kinds of animals, right? And it doesn't kill them because they are grilled. It kills them because they cannot breathe. And basically, a marine heat wave is like forest fire. A marine heat wave is like a forest fire. It kills entire population of animals. And heat waves are getting more frequent because the fish cannot adapt to a heat wave. They just die. And so you ask about La Nina, an El Nino event. That's what you did, right? In the Atlantic. I don't know much about the Atlantic, but I know lots about the Peruvian and the dynamics of Nino and La Nina. But basically, this phenomenon is a local phenomenon. The global warming is now covering all ocean, and warming in all ocean lead to deoxygenation and problems. There will be people working on local condition. I don't work on local condition, and I know only that we are in deep trouble with the ocean as a whole getting warmer and deoxygenated. In other words, I don't understand. I don't want to respond, or I cannot respond to your question about specifically La Nina in the Atlantic. Okay, you had a second question.
Okay. Another question, otra pregunta. Sí.
Hola, buenas tardes. Gracias por la presentación. Quería preguntarte algo sobre la presencia cada vez mayor de un parásito, sobre todo yo lo conozco en Europa, que es el anisakis.
Anisakis, ya.
Si se conoce la razón de por qué al principio estaba en unas pocas especies, cada vez está apareciendo en más y más hasta que está prácticamente en todas las capturas. ¿Cuál es el origen de esta parásito?
I know, like, there was a young man here, he had discovered a parasite, right? He had discovered an animal recently, right? When I was a student, I discovered a fish parasite, and I sent it to Holland, to a colleague, and he quickly described it without me. So I could have discovered a parasite, a fish parasite, but I don't get any credit for it. So, in other words, I don't know anything about parasites. Anisakis, I think, is very prevalent in a fish called Wittling. I don't know the name in English.
Merluza.
Yeah, and the fish
Whitefish.
the fish that have that, they are used for fish meal and processed to animal feed, and they reduce the market value of the fish because they cannot be marketed for people. But that's all I know. I don't know. I would assume, though, that global warming and deoxygenation make the fish weaker, and that they will be more susceptible to parasite. But I don't really know anything about it.
Y una segunda, ¿puedo hacer un segundo comentario? El comentario sobre México, que parece que no tiene todavía una captura demasiado grande o en peligro, yo matizaría un poco en la parte de lo que es el Caribe.
Yeah.
Y sobre todo el Caribe en el norte, cerca de Cancún. Tenemos una situación donde hay una demanda altísima por el turismo de estas capturas Y aunque en el arrecife tenemos una gran producción de peces y de proteína,
Yes, but
sin embargo, las referencias van a determinadas especies de la cadena trófica que juegan un rol muy importante en el arrecife,
Yeah.
como es el mero. Y ahí esa demanda tan alta
Yes.
por el turismo sí está ejerciendo un problema.
basically, the problem in fisheries is that the demand is essentially infinite for certain products. It cannot be met, the demand. And tourist area like here, Cancun, can only survive in terms of serving food by importing massive quantities from elsewhere. You see, let's say the Polynesian in the Pacific, they have lived long time in islands, little islands, with a limited amount of fish. And they had a management system that was obeying. They respected the management that the chiefs, cacique, that the chief told them. But the real reason why they obeyed is because they had no market. If you live in a village, in a little village on the sea, if you catch 3 times more than you're supposed to, where are you going to sell it? You cannot sell it. You cannot transport it. Now, transport this a few hundred years, and you have it now. The chief, you don't obey the chief because you have a Yamaha engine, and you can grab all the groupers, the mero, and sell it in the capital. And if the capital cannot eat them, you can put them in a plane to Paris or to New York. And you can see in Paris or New York, in the market, you can see mero from the Pacific. So we have a situation where local fisheries, which are limited, have an infinite market, a market that is so big, it's like it's infinite. So it cannot be managed anymore because the law is too easy to break the law. So that is what undermines fisheries regulation. That's the problem you have with Totoaba in the Gulf of California. And so massive tourism will create this problem. And there is in Spain now big demonstration against excessive tourism. You probably have read that. And I can imagine a situation where one day you will have that as well. Because it creates an unmanageable situation. And fisheries are inherently limited. The productivity of the system is limited. So it's not like agriculture. Agriculture, you can put more inputs, more fertilizer, better plants, better everything. But fisheries, we don't produce anything. We just harvest what nature produces. Because nature is inherently limited, we cannot have an infinite demand. We cannot satisfy an infinite demand. And so the situation that we put natural system in is not resolvable. There is no solution to that. The demand has to be reduced to accommodate the productive capacity of the system. If it is excessive, which I showed you there, what it does, everything goes down the hill. That there is no way getting around it. You see, it's like physics with global warming. If you have greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, then it's getting warmer. And in biology, another thing is the productive capacity of a system is limited by that system. And your demand is not going to affect that system. It's not going to increase productivity. It's going to reduce it. So that is a problem that we have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pauly. I've been a fan of yours for many years, and I appreciate your work incredibly. I'm very interested in myctophids. I did a study of myctophids. We published a paper on plastics in myctophids, and I was surprised to hear that you thought there was going to be a fishery developed for it. I'd heard there was some schooling species near Saudi Arabia and in the Gulf there, but that was harvested. But I didn't realize that it was basically a non-schooling fish that could be harvested. Wouldn't it take a tremendous amount of trawling effort in order to aggregate sufficient myctophids in the Great Pacific Ocean? Or how do you imagine that these fish that are basically not a schooling fish would be brought to market?
Essentially, I will send you a paper that I wrote recently about myctophids, and some Russian helped, and there are quite a few myctophid fisheries that have developed in areas where they do school or aggregate. But the point is that the Norwegian have started a research program, and I was made aware of this recently when the Assets Journal of Marine Science, which is published by a fellow as editor who is in Norway, announced a special edition about myctophid. And why would they do that? Because they want to feed myctophid to the salmon. And they are developing method where they don't trawl but pump. They're using this method also to pump krill. They are essentially pumping water and filtering it and throwing back in. And I don't know what concentration on that become profitable. It depends how much they are worth to the Norwegian, but they are trying. They are trying, and they are investing millions of bucks into trying to develop method for exporting myctophid.
Yeah, thank you very much for that answer. It explains a lot.